6 o'clock on Tuesday, December 10th, 2024, time for the regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm Michael Faith. I hereby call this meeting to order. The agenda packets are available on litchfieldpark.gov, and video recording of the meeting can be seen 24 hours after the meeting. Everybody join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, next item is the call to the community. Seeing no community, we'll move on to the next item of business. Item number A is the approval of minutes. This is the discussion and possible action to approve the November 12th, 2024 regular meeting minutes. Do we have any revisions? Go ahead.
Yes, I would ask that wherever it says board member in the minutes, which occurs in 4 places, that be changed to commissioner.
Any other comments? Do I have a motion?
Move that we approve the minutes of the November
12th.
meeting. Thank you.
I second.
As corrected. Okay, second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? None. The motion carries. Next item is B, proposed zoning code text amendment to sections 27C and 28. Presenter is Randy Proch. This is the discussion and possible action to recommend approval to the City Council for the proposed zoning code text amendment related to sections 27C and 28. Go ahead and take it away.
Chair, Commissioners, good evening. Glad to see you back in 3 dimensions. I apologize for COVID last month, but glad we were able to still meet and have the introduction presentation for discussion and possible action this evening. Just a quick recap of what we talked about 4 weeks ago was let's put this to start with, just the alphabet soup of sorts, trying to interpret and read the zoning matrix, which is the list of all of the possible uses you can do within your zoning district and the corresponding footnotes that follow. As proposed last month and as suggested for this evening as far as the recommendation, it now reads such as far as piece lettering as P being permitted outright. And again, this follows what you would see in most other jurisdictions just for ease of developers coming into our city. C is for conditional, T is for temporary. Those were split formally, or I should say currently. They're noted as a U. Whether that U means a temporary use permit or conditional use permit is a dealer's choice. I can extrapolate based on the use permitted, but I'd rather just have that stated outright. The Octothorpe hashtag pound symbol, depending on your generation, is now a little note that is on some of the uses. These are for situations that there are additional standards. Previously, we had shown those as a whole bunch of different letters, such as M, H, S, and W. Instead, this is just going to be noted as that Octothorpe shows, and I'll show this more in the following slides. And depending on the use, those are either permitted outright with P or conditionally permitted with C. Next, the asterisks. This was something on the books already that was not proposed to be changed as part of this amendment. These conversations we've been having the past 2 months are very specific, keyed in proposals for your consideration. At some point in the future, we'll look at the code more holistically. The next one, which wasn't there, but is always better to say something than leaving it for interpretation, is just that hyphen, just to say not permitted. Instead of having a blank cell that doesn't say anything, I wanted to make sure that those were notated as not just blank, but hyphened out to say not. And of course, lastly, there may be other subsequent standards similar to the Octothorpe in the zoning code sections 10 through 27. These are the individual codes per zoning district. On occasion, it may have different or more stringent requirements for those zoning districts. So in case of conflict, that would prevail over the table. So as mentioned, I'll skip L real quick, but M, H, S, W, these have all been cleaned up with the octothorpe. In occasions, again, it's conditional use permits. C, octothorpe falls. L, this was brought up in the 2019 conversation with this commission. I wasn't here. Not sure how many were here in 2019, but they started conversations about text amendment. And one of the things they noted was some of the uses had an L in what was L intended for. Footnote noted it was permitted when compatible with surrounding area, but there was absolutely no language to say, what does that mean? How do you enforce that? What's to say yes or no? What's the process? So that was removed. This is very small font, but hopefully the large version was in your packet and had a chance to go through it. Only real significant visual change, I want to highlight just visual change, is that the table has now been broken between residential and non-residential categories. So what this means is that, generally you're not in a situation where you're doing one kind of thing or the other. You're either a resident living, or you have residential zoning, or you don't, when you're a developer looking to do commercial types of development. What it looks like currently is a hodgepodge of all the different zoning districts, which meant there were more blank cells than filled cells, because it was trying to show every kind of use, every kind of zoning district, which just led to a very wide document trying to read it online, or impossible to print if you want a paper copy. We'll highlight some of the changes specifically. They're shown in all caps as dictated by any sort of text amendments to code. But just to highlight those further, within the residential districts, schools were added. This is one of those things that schools are outright permitted in every type of zone. This is state law. We want to just reflect that and show that as letter P across all districts. Single family residential, as odd as this is, and I continue to find these sorts of oddities, nowhere in our zoning matrix says you can build a house within a residential zoning district. This was kind of a weird omission and wanted to get that on the books. And then anything, as mentioned earlier, that references another section of code, go here, go there, has just been notated with that octet. Removed in the residential districts, there was an allowance in some of the districts for arcades, games, and centers. This just did not seem appropriate in a residential setting. Fraternal civic clubs, this is a specifically tailored use that does not need to be specifically tailored. A community facility covers all types of gatherings, whether you're in the club, you're not in a club, you're in this group, you're not in that group. That's just a broader way to define that. Home businesses, and this is a future text amendment at some point, we have on there home businesses, but it does not actually list what is a home business. Is that a barber? Is that a notary? Is that, pet grooming? We don't have any sort of allowances or standards for what a home business is. I'm working with our finance department to generate a list of all the business licenses we have that list a residential home as their business address to determine what exactly they're doing. In most other cities, there aren't any sort of business activities within a home. Usually it's mobile. If you're a pet groomer, you don't have a line of cars outside your house waiting for someone to bring your dog in. You have the, suds and pups van, and you go to other people's houses instead of having, a line of cars down the street. You are the one car that goes to someone else's house. Again, these are all pretty industry-wide standards, but we don't talk about it at all at this point. So that'll be something that will need to be brought back before you in the future date. Temporary uses, we don't have any standards for temporary uses. This is covered within the application packet. That'll be further refined as part of just staff updates instead of code updates. Again, this was that separation between, formerly it all said you. Well, is that a conditional use or is it a temporary use? For things, and we'll see it in the non-residential side, it's not really a common occurrence on the residential side. But on the non-residential side, you might see something that says like model home sales office and have a U. Well, it's not a conditional use permit, it's a temporary use. It's not going to be there forever. There's standards that need to be developed for those sorts of situations. Manufactured structures, this is HUD requirements in residential settings, so there's a act of 1974 that dictates how manufactured homes can and shall be used that overrides any sort of local requirements. So this was one, again, residential use table that we just did not even talk. Any questions on non-residential before we move to, I'm sorry, any questions on residential before we move to non-residential?
So it's my understanding that with regard to businesses and the homes, we're removing that, but it will be somehow addressed at some point in the future.
Yes, Chair, Commissioner Ali, it's as vague as possible, and when it's vague, it's not enforceable. And it's not enforceable, we have no way to prescribe success. I have no language within the code that says what a home-based business is there limitations in hours of operation, is there a limit of how many people come to your house? So to have it on the books today without any information didn't accomplish anything. So I didn't want to create confusion by having something and not being able to explain or dictate how in fact we do it. This was removed, kind of backburnered in a way to get off the books until such time as we're ready to put it out there with the appropriate standards to match.
I just have concerns because I know that what you've described is people coming and going and things like that. There's a lot of people who have, home businesses because they do accounting from their home, or they do telehealth from their home, and businesses where people are not coming and going at all. And I just want to make sure that it's not going to create a problem later on down the road for those people who have businesses that don't require anyone to come and go, or it's just a base of operations for things that have nothing.
Certainly. So Commissioner, in those situations, I wouldn't even call it a home business. You just work from home. So that would be something to address further, and we can certainly add that to our conversation as far as a definition that corresponds to something that would have business activities occurring from outside public into the home versus someone that just works.
But if that's where the address is of the business itself, then it's a business, excuse me, at home, and that's how it's reported.
So the good news with that is all business licenses come to me for a zoning review to determine if it is a home-based business, or if it's just, this is their address of where they live and they don't need to have an office or whatever the business is. So it's, it hasn't been a problem so far, and I'm not going to create a problem moving forward as part of that review. But certainly the other thing I'm doing with the finance department is gathering a list of all the types of businesses we have to present a better case before this commission, as far as we have a lot of notaries, or we have a lot of barbers or hairstylists that want to work from their home, and then we can address holistically how do we want to handle those sorts of situations, if that's something we feel is appropriate out of the home or not.
The manufactured structures, you said that the HUD requirements kind of trump. There's no regulations or limits or anything that's left to the cities?
So, great question, Chair. This is, I'll think of these words before I say them out loud. Cities can, at this time, still enforce design regulations. In general, design regulations cannot be met by the types of manufactured home builders.
Okay. Yep.
So this is something that's come up 3 years in a row now from state legislators, feeling as though design standards are prohibiting home builders from creating affordability. And for 3 years in a row, local zoning control has been under attack, and it's gone up to the governor a few times now, that's been vetoed, that states that because our owners' requirements to have shutters on windows or have 3 different garage doors, that sort of thing, we've precluded people from being able to afford it. The kind of moot point in all this is there's 2 vacant lots left to be developed, and at that point we would be out of residential communities to build within the city.
I guess I'd be more concerned about somebody taking a house down and putting up a manufactured home for a cost savings benefit.
You're correct. They would still need to meet all of our design standards. And to do so with a manufactured home would be highly unlikely, but I couldn't speak better than presumptions at this point without additional research.
Is there something we can do instead of striking it to maybe bolster the city's position to protect the neighborhood as is?
So, Chair, it would be something that we would amend in the design regulations to do so. It is something I've done previously in other jurisdictions to ensure that neighborhood character is met as far as construction materials, which way the front door faces, number of windows, movements and elevation, that sort of thing. So yes, we can accomplish that independently of the zoning code matrix uses.
Any other questions at this time?
Randy, can you return to the residential table? You can permit it with special conditions, correct? Or is outright permitted?
Without special conditions, correct?
So, to pick on any in particular, so churches, for across the board in all residential districts. I would assume that there are other zoning standards such as parking requirements that basically is going to include any church from operating on a residential lot. So,
Chair, Commissioner Frazier, Councilmember Ledford. I don't know what title you prefer. The federal case is known as RLUIPA, which is the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. It's a test question on when you get your certification. It happened in 2000. Essentially, what it said is if you allow community facilities in residential districts, you need to allow churches in residential districts because you can't put more onerous standards as far as land use goes. I'll address your question in just a second. You can't put more onerous land use restrictions, whether or not they're religious, as far as a gathering of people. To your point, though, as far as, yes, there are parking considerations, ratios like 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 per fixed seats that has to be addressed. So it's certainly possible if the lot was big enough, if they met grading and drainage, if they met parking, if they met landscaping, if they met all of those criteria, that yes, a church could go in a residential zone district, same as a community facility can go in. It's not one that we could, we kind of have public facilities as our zoning district that's kind of that catch-all for buildings like the library, the rec center, and various churches. But we couldn't, unless we restricted community facilities, carte blanche, also in any other kind of assembly use, any residential zoning district, we couldn't restrict churches from residential zoning district.
I wasn't picking on churches in particular, they were just the first category that was permitted across the board without conditions. But, there's very few lots, if any, that a church of any size could work in Litchfield Park, without meeting the rest of the zoning code. So I just bringing this up.
Certainly.
There's a point that while permitted, the way lots are designed here and our other requirements, they're not possible.
It would be a tall task, certainly.
Anything else this time? Nope. Please continue.
Thank you. We'll go down to the non-residential table. This is by no means the totality of it. This is just what fits on one slide and just to show and highlight the same sort of changes that are being done. At some point, I'll look at agritourism. Agritourism is only permitted in one zoning district, agritourism. I'm not sure we're accomplishing what we meant to accomplish with that, but that's a story for another day. The only other change on here I thought was a bit interesting, and I'll use this little spotlight, is previously barbershop was permitted in neighborhood commercial, beauty shop wasn't, which seemed like a odd sort of thing that I did not want to try and call one a spade and the other a spade. And that was not part of our conversation last time, but that was one of the little cleanup things I thought, I think this is time to address this. I'll highlight just a couple of changes. This one's much simpler as far as what was modified, as far as added. We'll talk about moved in just a second. Added was the same notation that Octothorpe on all the ones that had corresponding additional standards. Again, schools, churches, across the board as far as permitted in all categories. We're going, once again, schools through state law, churches as far as RLUIPA and federal. Removed in non-residential districts. These were all uses that were brought before you last month as far as things that we just did not feel were ever going to occur here with the limited amount of land that we have left. This includes cemeteries and mausoleums, crematorium, a wholesale gasoline and propane dispensing. That reminds me of some valley codes that still have video rental store on the books. That's just one I don't think is ever going to occur. Hardware and home improvement stores, again, this is retail. This isn't one that had anything specific or different about, hardware store must have garden center, can have garden center. There wasn't any additional definition that defined that other than retail. The definition of retail actually includes, this sort of building materials as well. So we're covered. Home businesses was removed completely from the non-residential matrix. Again, these matrices have been split in two because, well, there's no home-based business in a non-residential district.
Right.
Hookah bar, and then we'll just proceed through the alphabet. Off-track betting establishments. Palm Street, palm reading, and fortune telling. Pause there in case the door opens. Door has not opened. I'll proceed. Restaurant takeout. This was undefined. I would hesitate to think that this meant drive-through. It seems as though this was more of a quick serve restaurant. We were trying to delineate between that and a sit-down restaurant, though since COVID times, everything is takeout. So this didn't seem like a hair split that seemed necessary. Tattoo and body piercing shops or establishments. This was brought up last month as far as, people seem to know the high-end shop, the $1,000 an hour shop. They do great business. They're artists. Yes, I cannot permit the good ones and not the bad ones. It's any of them. Temporary uses. This was shown as a separate line item without standards defined. This is somewhat similar to home-based businesses that we're going to have to talk about temporary uses as far as, is there a minimum size that it requires? Is a temporary use a sidewalk sale? Should they go through a temporary use permit for a sidewalk sale? That sort of thing. So the uses that were corresponding to that, like the model home sales trailer that we talked about earlier, is now notated as a T within the matrix, instead of being a separate line item. The left one was variety store. I couldn't tell you what a variety store is other than retail sales. So again, retail sales covers that. Before we moved on to city center and 27C, is there any questions on the non-residential proposed changes?
I'm sorry, what are you moving? You want anything that relates to these uses discussed now, or that would be under the next section of the land use definitions and?
Chair, Commissioner Lawrence, this is an update from our presentation last month with the corresponding language. Anything with the strike through is being proposed to be removed. Previously, anything in all caps is new language to be added. So yes, within the, confines of this section of non-residential table, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Like food court, or food trucks, rather, I know that's one of the allowed uses with temporary use permit, so, yeah, this doesn't address any food court, for instance, that would be elsewhere.
So, Commissioner, the food truck court that's within 27C, we will talk about in just a moment as far as the city centers.
Okay, great.
Questions, comments? I have one. If the tattoo, as an example, tattoo, body piercing shops or establishments, instead of leaving them as unpermitted, you've just completely removed them from the matrix, is that correct?
So, Chair, yes, if, it's somewhat similar to entertainment that's only permitted in one district. If the use is not permitted in any zoning districts, I guess to your point, you have two options. Remove it from the books, and if not listed, it's prohibited, or illustrate that it is one that is not permitted in all districts. I say that in a roundabout way to tell you that.
I mean, I followed you.
We had a similar situation, previous jurisdiction, where it was an art gallery, but their art was dermis, and the canvas was people.
Mhm.
And they declared themselves an art gallery that just provided the tools, and you were the instrument which was painted. I think I can follow that. And that was one of the situations that if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's a duck. And so I'd have to look back at our code. I don't believe we have the ability for an interpretation. That is something that a possible future amendment to address. There's probably something on the books. I'm sorry, it's probably something not on the books that's new and different. And people say, well, an art studio, not a tattoo shop. If I don't have art studio listed in the code nor tattoo shop, it'd be subject to interpretation as far as the closest we possibly match.
Instead of having it listed and showing as not permitted.
That's correct.
So which way are you, which is your recommendation?
Chair, the recommendation I would have for you in past experience is to strike completely from the code.
Is that for ease or for enforcement ability? Is it easier to enforce if it's shown as not permitted?
I'd say that the best way to describe it is business comes in, a realtor goes to our zoning code, has a client that wants to do X, Y, or Z here. The first thing they do is they pull this matrix. They say, where is it permitted? If it's not listed, it's not permitted, versus, oh, I see it here, but it's struck through in every district. I wonder if that's one of the things I can do, like PD overlay, and get a prohibited use as a permitted use through an overlay. I'd say that's bad practice, but I think that it invites more of a conversation. You show it on the books, and then again, on them not permitted on any categories.
Okay. Any other questions on this section?
I think that what I was looking at, the definitions does apply here, but restaurants are P, permitted without special conditions. And maybe they should be a C, permitted with conditional use, or I guess that without special conditions bothers me a little bit if they have outdoor seating areas or hours or noise generated by music or a lot of people, you know, so if it's permitted without special conditions, are those issues still reviewed? Not just a permit issue, but I think there's a lot of things with restaurants and bars and all that should be addressed.
Yeah, so
Reviewed.
Commissioner Lawrence, this is your thoughts are like my thoughts as far as I'm barely scratching the surface as far as how much needs to be addressed. So this is very much a isolated, specific request for you this evening as far as things that are being proposed, but by no means is this the end of the conversation as far as what more needs to be done. So things like the restaurant, I have not changed allowances. The only exception to that is the beauty shop, barber shop, which I thought was so trivial it needed to get addressed now as part of this update. But yes, to your point, there's so much more to talk about. So that'd be one that I haven't done any sort of prep or research to tell you or propose any changes to that this evening as part of this update, but that's something we can certainly address in the future update, I guess.
And so just be hesitant about approving, moving this forward, all the changes, but when there's a few things that need to be, you know, looked at again.
So
Anything else? Please proceed.
Thank you. City center, very similar to the other category, except since we have a very finite list. We didn't have to worry about blanks, we didn't have to worry about special conditions, we have specific definitions and allowances within city center. This is just a footnote, clean up, talk about the same thing, permitted without conditions. C is conditional use permit, T is a temporary use permit, which we talked about food trucks. And then D is a new and different one, permitted to a development agreement. We'll talk about that a little bit further here. Previously, it said PD, permitted when approved as part of a development plan. And I talked about this two-dimensional version of myself on the computer screen, talked about this last month, but I'll reiterate this point just to make it very clear as far as what that entails. The idea is that city center is already a unique zoning district. It's not, you know, I think R1, R110, R18, R16 are just residential, single family, and the densities that follow. C1, least intense commercial, C2, more intense, C3, most intense. We've already created CTR. Another way we could have gone about it is just C2 with the PD overlay. So I tell you that to tell you that CTR is in itself a PD of sorts, a plan development. So the idea that some uses, let's say within a multi-tenant building within one lot, would somehow need to put a PD within a PD is odd. And through internal conversations, it wasn't the intent for that as much as it was intended to be part of the development agreement. That and CCNRs, other layers to this onion as far as the control and the desired outcomes that we're wishing to pursue. The CCNR specifically, not part of zoning code per se, but are how we are ensuring the highest and best use more than we would normally get from a zoning code. Somewhat restricted as far as what a zoning code is and can act as. So we are landowners, we can have additional standards for CCNRs. Very similar to we have standards for accessory structures, but your HOA might have additional standards. So again, PD was scratched, given a D instead for a development agreement. And then the second part of this is the clarification. We have a definition in there as far as what a residential unit attached was. And the definition reads as follows: one family dwelling attached to one or more one-family dwellings by common vertical walls, forming a building or group of buildings on one or more lots. That reads and talks like a condo, like a townhouse, duplex, triplex. Current definition, as far as examples it gave, this use may include, it said, apartments, townhomes, duplexes, triplexes. An apartment by its definition is not a one-family dwelling attached to one or more family dwellings. That is a multifamily unit as part of a multifamily building. So it didn't read right to me, and as far as all the other words that are associated with this definition, that was switched from apartment to condo. Any questions on CTR before I would ask for a recommendation?
Questions?
Are
Go
we
ahead.
getting into, there's so much that was trying to get my head around. So are we looking at definitions at all? In this part of the presentation?
So as far as the rest of, as far as the rest of 27C, no. This was one that was an outlier that I thought should and needs to be addressed. We actually do have a proposal currently under review that is proposing condos. And on the books today, condos were listed. So this was one, a cleanup. And, you know, I apologize, it doesn't, it's outside the scope of what's being talked about as far as very specific cleanups and very specific conversations about very specific uses. But this was the one, I guess, that was a slight tangent in the kind of discussion we're having to address an immediate concern as far as the development we have in proposed.
So it's just the one item.
That's correct, but Gladly take any feedback or questions, concerns you have on other definitions within 27C, similar to the feedback on restaurants.
Jared, can I mention these?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Under food trucks, or food truck, where is that? Food truck court, the grouping of 3 or more. Wondering if that leaves it open for just food truck, period. It needs to be a court, if we need to have 3, what if 1 or 2 food trucks come to an event? I hate to say that you can't do it unless you have a minimum of 3 or whatever that, just having that number in there seemed to be limiting it. The opportunity. I mentioned restaurant, patios, et cetera. Under high density multifamily residential. 3, 4 pages in, number 3, high density multifamily residence, it says that it's been modified. High density multifamily residential uses may only be approved pursuant to a development agreement and would be limited to 70% of the gross floor area of a development proposal. I didn't know if there's nothing that mentions the other 30%, and I'm not sure if that needed to be clarification. If you say 70% will be for this use, does that leave it open? Does the development agreement address the other 30%?
By the Chair, Commissioner Lawrence, I'll go second question then first. So one of the other things I should have mentioned is that the creation of CTR, I don't know how long ago it was, I'm hoping some of you, maybe all of you were part of that, was an onerous process as far as finding the right language, going through the outreach correspondence, the back and forths. I mean, essentially, I was trying to advance the plan from 1995 as far as the downtown master plan that was trying to get this. So I was instructed and through legal review to be very specific about our conversation this evening, because anything greater than these very small corrections would need to go back from council standpoint and from a legal standpoint, a much larger conversation, I think, than what is permitted at this time. For that GFA maximum question specifically, I would interpret that as your zoning administrator, planning director, city planner, historic preservation officer, addressing technician, and GIS technician. That it would be open to any other use within that allowed table beyond the residential to make up the rest of that GFA gross floor area. For the food truck definition, food trucks have changed through state law twice as far as what is permitted. The most impactful is that a food truck can operate in any legal parking spots, regardless of its proximity to a restaurant. This was something Representative Kevin Payne out of Peoria proposed as a food truck owner. So essentially, we have a Litchfield Square that's full of on-street parking. Any food truck can operate at any time, any of those parking stalls without any city restriction. The only things that cities can restrict are distance to residential zoning districts. This was a big problem in Mesa. Mesa had a food truck court kind of set up on a vacant lot. They had like little train rides, they had music, and they had all sorts of things with the residents living 50 feet away. And so this was one of those things that is permitted within the city to restrict within residential settings. I mentioned the 2 changes. The second change said, sure, restrict, but if I have a quinceañera, a wedding, a party at my house, I'm suddenly told I can't cater my own event within my house by bringing a food truck within residential districts. So that was the second change. If you are serving yourself, a food truck can come in. This is somewhat similar to an ice cream truck. Difference being an ice cream truck is always mobile moving versus a food truck, which may stay an hour, 4 hours, 6 hours. To your other question on the court as far as how many defines, the good news is you still need property owner permission. If they were to come into Litchfield Square within the park, because the park in the middle was designed as though it could be a food truck alley. They would go through a special event permit through community services through Tricia Kramer. And a special event permit is a blanket permit that covers any and all activities within that permit under her. So it wouldn't even be a temporary use permit through us or for this board or this commission, excuse me, now I'm thinking about boards. It wouldn't be through this commission, that would cover, the insurance and the liabilities under that one. It's a long way to answer the
Yeah.
question, I apologize.
Okay. Anything else from anybody? You're gonna move on to a recommendation?
Yes, so our request for this commission is you take the following action. Recommend approval of zoning case, I can't see the line, PZ 2464 to city council, subject to the red line clean versions of 27C and 28 provided to you this evening.
Do I hear a motion? Okay, I'll move to approve text amendment file number PZ 2464. We have a second?
Also,
Okay. Any discussion? None? All those in favor say aye. Aye. I think I see 3 ayes. All those against? I'm sorry, which way were you?
Table it, but that's your motions on the floor.
Okay. So that was a no, nay. Okay. So we had 3 4s, 2 nays. Motion passes. Go on to the next item of staff report on current events. Does the staff have any reports on current events?
Chair, I always do. Yes, there's much to do. Firstly, our thanks to Commissioner Frazier for serving on this commission. He is graduated. Moving to city council, we appreciate your time. We will have a vacancy created with his promotion. One of the things that is being discussed at the city council level is the possible desire or need to have a council member sit on every board or commission, so there might be a chance, if you'd like to hang out, that seat could be filled by a council member instead. Similarly, DRB and BOA are sat by Councilmember James, and then RPG would also, in theory, have a council member sit as one of the RPG members. So thank you. We'll see you in January to talk about all this again. Secondly, of course, happy holidays to everyone, and then we'll get into the more boring things. So we'll be back again in January. I'm gonna have these sorts of meetings every month. And as you find other things you want to talk about, feel free to call me, email me. We'll put them on the books. We'll do the research and we'll bring them before you. So parking is our next one. Not a big change by any means, but there are some ratios we'd like to address. There are some uses we'd like to address. And again, this is just, these are Band-Aids on a broken back, quite frankly. Maybe to your point, Commissioner Lawrence, we're getting right up, quite frankly, and we're putting as many holes in the dike as possible, but we're getting fun. Secondly, design. There was a very large conversation over the past year as far as if there was need to create a historic preservation commission and the governance that goes with that towards becoming a certified local government through State Historic Preservation Office, also known as an HPC, to become CLG for SHPO, just to make it shorter. That is not going to occur at this time. Instead, what may occur is some changes to our design code that talk about the heritage of some of the original homes, because we are, quite frankly, running out of original houses that have not been modified for years. Whether there's a desire to keep historic elements or not, that's a conversation yet to come. And then any sort of state law changes, group home, sober living, cell towers, these seem to be moving targets that we're always a code behind on, and certainly we'll research all those hot topics that come out of the legislative session. On the books, in earmark in 2027, we will have an opportunity to look at a full-blown modernization of the code. between the hilltop and square. I simply do not have time to come before you holistically to look at this code. So again, we'll be pot shotting through the next couple of years. I think I brought it up last time, but we have a lot of original plats within the city, original neighborhoods of the city that were developed in the county when incorporation occurred. We gave them the zoning district, but they don't meet the setbacks of the zoning district in which they were given, creating legal nonconformity, creating challenges as far as funding for loans, money or sales of their homes. Lastly, on special projects, tune in to DRB in February. Leonard will be there. We should have a number of projects within the square and quite possibly the high school as well within the was my presentation. As you know, it's for information only. If you have questions, want to chat about any of these items, please reach out, email, or call.
I have a question about reading out. There's a protocol that's to go through the chair with communications, or it's open to just,
You can communicate directly with the city planner.
okay,
You're just fine.
all right. Do we have your email address?
Every time I send out the packet,
That's, okay.
that would
great.
be best. Yes.
Good. I didn't know what your phone number, if that was just an office number or. So, great. So I can text there.
So that actually is a great point. With the informality of that, I would prefer our correspondence to be email or phone, just to stay on the up and up. Of course, this is always subject to public records, just like our computers are, but there's an informality with this as far
It's
as.
good fall between the cracks.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else on staff report on current events? Seeing nothing else, we're going on to the commissioner reports and current events. Do any of the commissioners have a report on current events? Saw that the park is open now. They took the fence down. Fantastic. All right, anything else? Nothing. On to executive session. I don't think we have a need for executive session. So adjournment. Do we have a motion?
Move we adjourn?
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. We are adjourned. The regular meeting is adjourned. Do we have another meeting today?
Jerry,
We have a work study session?
week 2.
Okay. All right. What time is it? 6:50-ish. It is 6:50 on December 10th, 2024. The time for the work study session of planning and zoning. I'm going to call this meeting to order. First item of business is the citizen review section 30 landscaping. The presenter is Randy Proch. Public discussion related to the proposed zoning code text amendment regarding section 30 for minimum planting requirements.
Thank you, Chair.
Take it away.
Rena, will you click center of the slide? Practice before. Hang on, I'm going to, will you click the screen there? Excellent. Okay, two items. A is the citizen review, Chair, since there are no members of public for the citizen review portion of these work study sessions, I will move on to B. I will be brief, but just hang with me because there's a lot of code I will read through to make a very short point after the long walk for a short drink. I think it's the first. Landscaping is found within section 30 walls, landscaping fences. Specifically, the design standards and requirements are in 30.05, 3, 4, and 5, depending on the single family, multifamily, or non-residential districts. Curiously, just one of those things as far as 10 pounds in the 5-pound bag, 27C 0382, which is the city center zoning district, says requirements for walls, landscaping, and fences are set forth in section 30. But section 30 defines them as single family, multifamily, and non-residential districts. City centers, both residential and non-residential. So I don't know which one to apply because these are done by districts, not by use. One of the things we fixed with signs. You're gonna hear a lot of words today, just, and that doesn't read very well, I apologize. There's four main categories: landscaping, street frontage, or the perimeter landscaping, that's what you call everything along the right of way. The parking lot are all the islands you see dictated every 12 spaces. The on-site or enhanced landscaping is everything else, essentially, other than the building foundation landscaping, which is that little strip of plants you see next to the front door. So just keep those in the back of the minds. I'm going to go very quickly through all of this code because the point I'm trying to make is this code is not definitive of how to be successful. So moving very quickly. Single family districts, all required landscape areas must be covered with any combination of vegetative and non-vegetative landscape materials. Vegetative being plants, non-vegetative being rock. Landscaping shall include a combination of ground cover, shrubs, and trees. Decomposed granite is permitted, however, if you use a minimum of 25% of vegetative landscape material at maturity or synthetic turf. What that means is you can't do 100% rock, at least 25% of that should be lantana, emu, something growing and breeding in the ground. Multifamily. An average of 15-foot wide landscape areas required along all interior property lines. This is because multifamily is usually adjacent to something that's not multifamily. So it's essentially a buffer between disharmonious uses. Trees with a minimum size of 24-inch box, very standard across the board, should be planted in the manner to provide a buffer. Makes sense. Along public streets, an average of 20-foot wide landscape areas required shall incorporate a minimum of 15-gallon trees, smaller because you're not worried about that screening effect like you would next to single family. As a buffer for mitigating spills of light and noise onto and off the property, minimum of 25% shall be 24-inch box. That just gives a bit of variety. Further, within multifamily, within common open space, minimum 24-inch box shall be planted a ratio of 1 per dwelling units. Foundation planting, which we talked about against the building, should be utilized to complement building elevations, provide a shade and increase privacy. Minimum 50% of the building frontage shall have foundation plantings. Makes sense. Everything else is the front door, service entries, what have you. That's landscape parking islands within parking areas. Every 12 spaces shall have the islands containing at least one 24-inch box tree. For non-residential or resort districts, minimum of 10% of the net area of any site shall have be landscaped. Minimum of 5% in an industrial district. Everything else can essentially be hard surface, the building, the parking lot, what have you. Landscaping is required along the street frontage, the street sidewalk, in buildings, parking areas, loading and storage areas. Essentially, whatever isn't paved or building is landscape. Makes sense so far. Along all other streets, a 10-foot landscape shall be required. I'd like to tell you what the other street is and what its requirement is. It's not stated. Just as a little precursor of the conversation. This is more about the size of the tree. We'll keep going, and then size of the shrubs. Lastly, 5% of parking area exclusive of front yard perimeter landscaping and street trees shall be required. You meet this with the parking lot islands. The idea that we need to define percentages when you've already defined areas is an oddity. Same requirement from multifamily carries over to non-residential as far as how many parking stalls you need in a tree. And then all parking islands are separated for adjacent residential use by 10-foot landscape strip. So essentially we're saying a 10-foot buffer between a commercial and a non-residential use. That's pretty tight. Again, same thing. You can't have just rock. You have to have 25% ground cover. And again, foundation planting. This time on the curb instead of 50%. I tell you to tell you that there's only 2 instances where it actually tells you quantities or ratios. Well, for multifamily, ratio of 1 tree per dwelling unit. So at least that one, I know how many trees I need to go buy. The other one is the landscape parking lots, 1 tree. That is the only mention in this entire section as far as quantities, ratios, or any sort of formula to tell you actually how much to plant. It's It's just another conversation I bring before you as far as, and trying to extrapolate an answer. I've had a few developers now that want to know what's the ratio. And I have no way to describe what the ratios are. I have other, and part of our earlier conversations from other times as far as, well, what makes sense? What makes sense is location requirements. And this goes back to that picture example, on-site, perimeter, parking lot, foundation. And the situations that you have dissimilar uses, you have a buffer condition. Usually that buffer is something like 30 to 50 feet because there's very stark differences in intensity. You back up to Fry's, you should not have a semi truck 10 feet away from your backyard wall. The other part of this is doing percentages based on district. Residential generally has more landscaping requirement the more dense you go. Once you go to a townhouse or condo situation, you are putting more people in a very small amount of space. To contrast that, you should have more landscaping because it's for the benefit of all of those residents. Commercial we list is 10%. That's generally 20 to 30 across the other cities, and industrial is generally 10%. Ours is 5. So for what we think of ourselves and our tree-lined streets, we have some of the least requirements around the valley. To prescribe success, I'll show you 3 examples of tables. You break it down. Which one are residential, commercial, industrial? Okay, I have your column. Let's go to the rows. Where do you need to put landscaping and what planting requirements? This is what I've grown up with. In other words, I've got examples from around the valley as far as how you prescribe this. Ours is paragraphs upon paragraphs of language that actually don't say what you need. And these are just 3 examples as far as how that's done. This is very much an introduction for you this evening to get you thinking about it. I have no proposed language at this time. I have no proposed best examples other than just spiffing with you as far as the formality with that. Just as far as something to think about. I'm not sure that and it says the same thing I say to you every time as far as the next step. But I would tell you that if this is something you see as a concern as well, I think we would bring this before you again as another work study session in a more robust way to talk about where we are and where we need to be. And with that, I invite any conversation this evening on top.
Conversation, questions, concerns, go ahead.
I would like to see somehow incorporate in the discussion, replacement landscaping. Under building edge, when we discuss, it says use of trees and tree grates along the edges and walkways highly desired. We've all been down sidewalks that have empty grates because the trees have not been replaced. And the developer will do, and it's because I worked for a developer for 20 years, and they will say and do anything in the beginning, it'll look great, but the ongoing maintenance, they're gonna own the buildings and areas they need to replace that landscaping over time.
Commissioner Lawrence, thank you for that. One of the other, I'd add to that by telling you that historically, there's been a push to add language as far as healthy and growing manner to just compound that. We can always have our code enforcement officer go out and cite ones that do not match what was originally permitted and approved through DRB as far as site plans and address them that way. There are some users that have a different definition of what healthy looks like, I would tell you. And we can prescribe that success instead of the cupcaking of the shrubs and the topping of trees to be somewhat diminutive, the word's there somewhere, because there are businesses that say, well, if I have a health grown tree, they can't see the sign of the building. When they obviously need to advertise, so let's chop the tree down. That really doesn't meet the intent.
No, I would say our HOA at Litchfield Greens, for instance, says you will have like 1 or 2 trees out front. If one dies or is taken down, you have to replace it.
Certainly.
And so it's just that idea. I mean, this is a big age over here, you know, so. I think just to maintain the look, we're talking about the lush landscaping and everything else, and to comply with that, we need to have something about replacement.
Thank you.
Anything else? That was item B of business, correct?
That is correct, yes.
All right. So seeing nothing, we'll move on to item 3, executive session. I don't think we have one. And then item 4 is adjournment. I'll entertain a motion.
Move we adjourn.
We have a motion. Second, anybody?
Second.
Commissioner Lawrence, second. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? None. We are adjourned from our work study session.